So it was August when I was here last. I was beginning to think I had screwed up. No, I'm just joking. I'm wondering, how many of you were here in August? Oh, good, pop quiz. What did I preach about? August. Come on now, that's not that long ago, is it? Jesus. Yes. When all else fails? Jesus. Yes, and actually, specifically and broadly, trying to make the point that it's all about Jesus. And so help me out for a second, because I'm going to build on that point with something else. And so first of all, if those of you who do already know Jesus, who is he? Just give me like some one word or short phrase answers. Who is Jesus? Son of God. Son of God. Snap, that was quick. Savior. Redeemer. King. Not just king. King of kings. Yeah. Prince of peace. Healer. Teacher. Deliverer. We could go on, right? We could take up all my time with this? Okay, so we're not going to, in case you were getting hopeful. But the point, these names, just take any one of them, right? We could do a series just on these names and go on about Jesus. It's all about Jesus for a reason. It's because of who he is. It should be all about Jesus. That's just a moral imperative. It should be all about Jesus. And as far as God's concerned, it is all about Jesus. So we are amongst a very fortunate, if you can use that word, few, who have been able to know Jesus intimately through his word, through his spirit, and it's a tremendous privilege. But I would ask you, and this is where we're going to go, I would ask you, given these names, given these descriptions of Jesus, what is the appropriate response to the fact that, at the risk of being a reductionist, that it is all about Jesus? What's the appropriate response to that fact? That's what we're going to discuss tonight. What is the right response? Now, fortunately, Jesus answered this for us. And so the bottom line, I'll just give you a heads up. The bottom line is that the appropriate response to it being all about Jesus is to follow Jesus. Are you with me? Does that just make logical sense? If nothing else, okay. So if it's about him and you want to make sense of your existence, following him makes the most sense. That's Christianity. Christianity is following Jesus and doing it together, and the implications of all of that. That's Christianity. And so you call yourself a Christian, that's what you mean to be saying, I am a follower of Jesus, and that's how I live my life. And so what I want to do is unpack that just a little bit. I believe Jesus gave us three keys to what it means to follow him. He's fairly exact in his descriptions on this. It's just sometimes we scatter it amongst a lot of theology and get lost in it all and forget what we're even about. So I like to kind of clear things up a little bit when I get the chance. Following Jesus is about two things, and the first one is faith. And we're going to see that as we unpack these three keys. So the first key we're going to go to, I hope you grabbed a Bible. I very subtly stacked the Bibles in front of the door. I hope you got the hint. Because you're going to need a Bible, or you can just trust me, I guess, which is I don't advise. I advise you opening your Bible. So the first key is about our posture, and then it's recorded in a few of the Gospels, but we're going to go to Mark's version of it. For no particular reason, we're just going to Mark's version of it. So Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, verses 34 through 36. This is an interesting context a little bit. It's after he told Peter for Satan to get behind him. And he said, it's because you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. So that kind of actually helps if I had more time. But anyway, let's jump right into 34. So then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, if anyone would come after me, okay, there's the follow me bit. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to, that's pretty intense. I don't know if you caught that. Let me just back up for a second and say that again. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? So, I don't have a lot of time. I only have about an hour, right? So I don't have a lot of time. Yeah, I was joking. To unpack each of these. This should be like a 4-week series or some such thing. For me, probably an 8-week series, but I only have this one night. So I'm not going to be able to get into, what does that mean? What does that mean? I'm not going to be able to do that. I just want to, at least in this case, just feel the tone. Just feel the tone of what Jesus is saying. He has to be all the things we described for him to have the nerve to say these kinds of things. Who says this? If you want to follow me, first of all, he's assuming you want to follow him. If you want to follow me, come after me, deny yourself, take up your cross. If you want to save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for me and for the gospel, then you'll save it. For what good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? It's pretty complete, right? This is the tone. The tone is, what is the appropriate response to this Jesus and to what he has done? What should we say back? What should we do back? What is the appropriate response? And we just sang a song, actually, that did a pretty good job of saying it. What can I say? What can I do? Except, what's the next line? Offer my heart. Give it all. That's the appropriate response, and that's what he's saying. And actually, he's going a tad bit further to say that's just the appropriate response. It's the only acceptable response. And I can get really upset at this point, just because when you connect with Jesus, when your heart connects with Jesus, it gets very personal. And when you start to see Jesus in all these ways that we've described him, as your Redeemer, as your Savior, as the Son of God given to you, given for you, and you start making these connections, you start getting a bit protective. And so anything less than losing your life for Jesus will not do. It will not do. Anything less than me losing my life in response to Jesus, any other response will not do. It's coming up so short. It's all we've got. And honestly, my life is not nearly enough, but it's all I've got. So I can't give anymore. If I could, I should, but I can't. So I can give my life. I can lose my life. That's all I got. It isn't worth a whole lot. It's worth a bit to me, but I mean, it's the universe, so what? Phil Smith. What's Jesus gain from my life? Nothing. So it doesn't, the transaction is not in any way fair. But nevertheless, this is what he says he's after for some strange reason. So that's what I can do. And that's what he'll settle for. And in his amazing grace, he will settle for my life. I think that's an amazing transaction. I think I got the better end of that deal. But any other kind of response, a kind of half-hearted, half-committed, I guess I'll go to church kind of response, is great if you're into religion. It's not so great if you're into Jesus. They're not the same thing, and he is not about to trade himself for a religion. He won't do it. It's beneath him. It's not fair. It's not right. So instead, he wants this relationship that requires our hearts. It requires everything. And he says, so if you want to follow me, it's easy. Here's what you do. You lose your life. Just deny yourself. No problem. Just give it up. Like I said, we don't have time to describe what that means. You're just supposed to get the tone of it, and I hope that happened. But look what he pits this up against. So he kind of draws this line, and if I was a youth group, I'd be using an easel right now, and draw this line down the middle of following him on the one side and not following him on the other side. And those are the only two paths of life, as far as he's concerned. From what I can tell from reading the Bible, there's only two paths of life. There's one called following him, which I would label, based on all the other scripture, worship. Okay? Worship is following Jesus, and then everything else isn't. It isn't worship, and it isn't following Jesus. Okay? Those two things are synonyms. And worship is more than singing songs. It is following Jesus. So there's that path, and then there's everything else, and that's another path. And, obviously there's all kinds of little complications we can debate about. But really, it's kind of that simple. And so when you look at across the line over on the other side, he describes two ways of living that life over there. One is saving, and one is gaining. So you see that? I didn't make that up, right? So he says, for whoever wants to save his life over here will lose it. And then he goes on to say, what good is it to gain the whole world but lose your soul? Lose your life, lose your soul. That's on this side of the page. Gain your life, gain your soul is over on this side of the page. That's through following Jesus. It's simple math. It's not making it complicated here. Go over here if you want to try and save your life, but you'll lose it. Go over here if you want to try and gain the world, but you'll lose your soul. Or you can come over here and follow me, but you have to lose your life to do it. Straightforward stuff. On paper. On paper. Because the reality is what's driving this saving and gaining is so deeply rooted. It's as old as the human history, right back to the Garden of Eden, right? And hey, doesn't that fruit look good to you? You know that gain. It's right over there. I'll bring that back up in a minute. So I just want to set that up for you. Gain and save over here, follow Jesus over here, lose your life is the transition. Okay, key number 1, lose your life. Okay, key number 1. Key number 2, John chapter 15. Now, you can see why I said it's going to take two things to follow Jesus, and the first one is faith. You can see why I say that. If you're going to lose your life for someone, you're going to have to trust them a lot. Otherwise, that was dumb. Okay, so John chapter 15. The famous vine and branches passage, you probably are familiar with this. Again, he uses this extreme all or nothing kind of language. I am the true vine. I started in verse 1. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Stop for just a second. So, following Jesus, what is he interested in? He's interested in bearing fruit. Okay? You can sum everything up that way if you want. Following Jesus, what does it look like? Okay, there's 3 keys I'm giving you. But at the end result in practicing and using these 3 keys and doing what Jesus says and actually following Jesus is producing fruit. You will produce fruit. God will produce fruit through you. That's what he's saying here. But again, extreme language. So here we go. He cuts off, so he, the Father, cuts off every branch in me, Jesus, that bears no fruit. Cuts them off. It's pretty extreme. While every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. It feels a lot the same, by the way. Cutting off and pruning. It's that same kind of cutting, snapping, owie feeling. Anyway, so that it will be given even more, it will become even more fruitful. Fruit, he wants that fruit. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. And we could spend a lot of time painting that picture, but, it's a pretty simple agricultural rule that a branch cannot bear fruit on its own. It's a branch. It has no power that way. Okay, so remain in me. A branch cannot bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. What do you think key number 2 is? Remain in Jesus. Remain in me. Okay, remain. So that's the second key. He goes on to say, I'm the vine, you're the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he's a little repetitious because he knows we're dumb. He will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he's like a branch that is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound very positive. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. This is my Father's glory. This is to my Father's glory. Can you hear the passion of a son? This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. He will not settle for anything less than bearing fruit. Bearing fruit is not just activity. Bearing fruit is more to, and this has got to be obvious by the tone. Again, the tone. It's not just these simple actions that we can take. He wants to see something. Here's the way I like to describe bearing fruit. Basically, if we're still talking about it in 10,000 years, it was bearing fruit. Something like that. It's something that will still carry weight 10,000 years from now. To somebody, to God, it will still carry weight. Okay, so it's something, he goes on to talk about it's all connected to love. But it's going to be something that you are a part of, or that you participate in, or that you have carried out that will have impact on the kingdom, for the kingdom, in you or others, for the kingdom, on the kingdom, in a way that will affect the kingdom and people in the kingdom forever. And as Christians, we do this all the time. It's amazing. It's amazing that we have eternal impact on each other, on ourselves, on the world, people in the world. Eternal impact. That's awesome. But we only do that by remaining in Jesus. When we get all heady and full of ourselves and we start to remain in church, or remain again in that religion, or we remain in ourselves or whatever, nothing. Sometimes it'll look the same for the day, but it is not having that eternal impact. Nothing. Because we can't do it without Jesus. He's very clear on that. That's a key. It's a key, because if you don't do it, it don't work. It's as simple as that. That's why it's key. Both of these are that. You don't lose your life, it don't work. You don't remain in him, it don't work. Okay, that's why they're key. Very, very simple, very, very important. So the first one was our posture of surrender, losing our life. This one is our position, which is being in Christ. And I was told one day that if you're going to preach a good sermon, you should have 3 points and they should all start with the same letter. I didn't go to school for this, so I heard that. That's a rumor. So I'm on track here, except I never did figure out the 3-point part. These are the 3 points of my first point, and then I'll go on to my second point and actually preach my sermon, or whatever this is. So anyway, that's position, and again, Jesus will not be satisfied with anything less than bearing fruit. He talks about this getting cut off and stuff. He's just not happy with it. So we got to take that seriously. Now the third one's in Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 25 and going to verse 34. You're probably wondering if I'm ever going to get to Matthew 13. That's where my actual talk is. I'm getting there. This is all introduction. Matthew 6. Told you I only have one night. Okay, so you got the title, the heading of the passage. This will save me from reading it all. Do not worry. Okay, so you get the context. You're probably familiar with this passage. Jesus is like, don't worry. He's always saying these things. Don't worry. Oh, okay. I'll just stop worrying. It makes it sound so easy. Don't worry. And then he goes on to explain why it's not logical to worry, if you believe. And then he gets to the end and he makes this really kind of strange side note. It's like, it's not as straightforward as the other two, but it hits you square between the eyes if you're paying attention. And it's toward the end. So don't worry about what you eat, what you'll drink, what you'll wear, which if you've lost your life, it just follows, right? You've lost your life, you've denied yourself. Why are you worrying about food and what you'll wear and what you'll eat? Why are you worrying about these things if you've already lost your life? But he's going to go a step further than that, and he's going to say, here's what you should do instead. Instead of worrying, I'll give you something better to do. Here's what you should do, and it's in verse 33. But instead of worrying about your life, do this instead. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And let me paraphrase the rest. Let him worry about the rest. Let God worry about the rest. He'll take care of you. He'll take care of your food and your clothes and your house. You just Don't worry about that. That doesn't make any sense. Instead, spend your time, spend your thoughts, spend your concern seeking first the kingdom, his kingdom and his righteousness. And again, you can tell how that's a key. Because what if you're not? Just flip it over. What if you're not seeking first his kingdom and not seeking first his righteousness? Then what are you doing instead? You're not losing your life. You're worrying about yourself. You're worrying about your stuff. You're worrying about you. And you can see how that doesn't work. It's not going to work. It's only going to work if we seek the kingdom first. So this is our purpose. So we've got our posture, and we've got our position, and now we have our purpose. And so just pause for a second, because I don't know you people. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know your story. I don't know where you're sitting right now, so I'll just ask you all at the same time. Am I describing you? Do you believe in Jesus? Really, do you believe in Jesus? Because if you do, this is what it looks like. Lose your life. Lose it. Give it up. Hand it over. Lose your life. And then remain in him. Remain. Don't move. Remain. And then focus all your attention, what isn't already focused on remaining, focus all your attention on his kingdom. His righteousness also means justice, I believe. Yeah, his justice. It's kingdom of justice. His kingdom. Focus, focus, focus on that. So I'll just ask you again, am I describing you? Am I describing me? Am I describing you? I'll just ask you pointedly. Am I describing you? Lose your life, remain in him, seek the kingdom. If you've never been to that place, you got to ask yourself the question, back up and ask yourself the question, what do I really think about Jesus? And then follow forward rationally. If I really believe he is who he says he is, then I must step up to the right response and what he expects of me, which is to give him my life. Give him all the parts of my life and focus all what energy I have left for the rest of my life on his kingdom, not mine. His kingdom. Whatever that means, I'm not going to try and get into what it means. You can figure that out. Whatever it means, and he'll let you know if you're focused. If your heart's there, he'll let you know what it means. But you must be right there. Now, let me make one more point before I get to my sermon. So I think I worry. Here's what I worry about. I worry that we're so impressed, as we ought to be, with God's grace that we tend to forget what it actually is. And instead of saying, isn't this amazing that God forgives me when I fail, as Roberta was talking about, 1,000 times per day, isn't it amazing that he keeps just washing it away, and look what he did to make that happen with this Jesus we described on the cross. And that's awesome. And then we go, therefore he probably doesn't care about what I do. Should I go on sinning so that my grace may abound? I mean, that doesn't follow. So then we just go about living our lives as if it never happened. And instead of thinking of grace equals forgiveness, we've got this grace equals permissiveness thing. And we're all so scared of legalism that we don't want to set up any rules for ourselves. And that doesn't make any sense, because Jesus said, go into all the world and teach them to obey everything I've commanded. How are we going to do that if we don't believe he commanded anything? Everyone just floats around doing whatever and says, don't judge me. That isn't going to work when we got Jesus laying out these 3 keys that are demanding absolutely everything from us. We can't turn right around and say, oh, but whatever, he doesn't care. He cares. He cares, and he should care. And I get bothered with myself when I get distracted, and here comes the sermon. What's going on that I can't focus? And that's the second part. Faith and focus. So I can't focus. And I bet I'm not the only one. So if you have stepped across this threshold and you have made this inner core commitment, decision, conviction of giving Jesus everything, you believe in him that much and you really want to respond in that way, and so you dedicate yourself. You say, I lose my life and I'm remaining in him and I'm seeking the kingdom. How long do you last? How long does that work? How long does it take you before it doesn't work? The good thing about grace is you can do it again. So here's what I want to help you with. This is the part I want to help you with, and I'm doing this out of experience. This isn't some theological, I'll sit in the chair and talk down to you position. I told you some of my story at my profession of faith. Slight recap. I grew up a Christian. I got these 3 keys as a kid. It all made sense to me. Like, I get this, I'm in. And so I went through my life focused. And anyone that knew me would tell you this. Lose my life, remain in him, seek the kingdom first. Could have written it on my tombstone. That was the description of my life. I was on target. And away I went. And I just went here and I went there and I'm seeking the kingdom and I'm losing my life. And I was picking up speed. And I just fell into ministry because that's just what happens. And next thing I know, I'm doing things I had no rights doing by resume. But I'm doing it because I'm seeking the kingdom first or whatever. Here's something I didn't know about myself when I was doing all that. I was not very good with pain. I didn't know that because I hadn't had any really yet. One experience, this girl dumped me. That hurt. She dumped me hard too for another guy. Oh, that's another story, but that one set me back for a little bit. But then I got my chug going again. But then, 10 years ago, I ran up against betrayal. I didn't know what that was like, but I ran up against betrayal. And here's what I think happened. What some people meant for harm, God meant for good. So I think what he decided it was time for me to get a grip on was how to follow Jesus through the valley of the shadow of death. I had not done that before. That's the true test, and not just a true test. He didn't just test us because it's fun. He tests us because passing and getting through it is worth the test, okay? Having him with you in the valley is worth the valley itself. You don't know that till you're there. But so I hit this, I got this betrayal. Here's how I know that God was involved. Who gets betrayed 3 times? How does that happen? You start to think you're doing something wrong, let me tell you. So I did this betrayal thing and people didn't understand, so I lost a whole whack of people close to me all at once because I wasn't fighting for myself. Let it all go. I lost my ministry and a bunch of friends, and then I started losing my mind a little bit. I didn't understand. I started trying to, I couldn't distance what was happening from God because these were all Christians and my Christian mentor and stuff like that. I couldn't make the separation, and so it started to blend, and I started having all these feelings I didn't have before, like anger towards God. I didn't know how to process it. I was trying to pastor at the time. Can you imagine those sermons? Those were ugly. Very patient people, but anyway, over the years, financially, things didn't line up. Failed attempt at trying to get some finances dealt with, ended up worse off, ended up borderline bankrupt, which I'm still dealing with. And then after that, I faced my second betrayal by my best friend. And then after that, and then I faced another betrayal by another friend. And I'm like, what is this? So we decided to start using Job as a verb. We'd say, oh, you got jobed. You got jobed. Ever been jobed? Yeah, a few hands in the room. Yeah, it sends you spinning. So that's actually what brought me here. When I first started coming here, man, you cannot imagine the mess. You cannot imagine the mess, especially if you'd have seen me in my 20s or my 30s. To see me in my 40s, you go, what happened to that poor guy? He is ruined. What happened to him? He's like a train wreck. A circus, one person called my life. And here's what I started to figure out that I want to share with you. This relationship we have with Jesus, where he carries 99% of the load, we have that 1%. And it's this relationship between grace and faith where, you know God's doing all the work, but then Jesus says, lose your life. Well, whose choice is that? Ours. And he says, remain in me. Well, whose choice is that? Ours. And then he says, seek the kingdoms first. Seek the kingdoms for whose choice is that? Ours. So grace is not meant to replace us. It's meant to empower us so that we can do what we intend to do. But you have to intend to do it. So here's what I figured out after I got all this happened and diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety and tried pills and then went off and then all that sort of stuff. I have trouble thinking now. My brain used to be my biggest asset, and now it's there to torture me. And I questioned my faith, and then I had to come back. And now you know what I have to do? And I think this is awesome. It's tough, but this is awesome. On almost a daily, but definitely on a weekly schedule, I have to preach myself back into my faith. Routinely. I have to, because I'll break down, and everything gets whack and confused. And this brings me back to, let's go here for a second. I'll show you how this works. Matthew 13. Okay, Matthew 13 is the parable of the sower. And I think Jesus has given us a hint to what's going on in my life and what's going on in some of your lives. Well, all of your lives, whether you know it or not. In Matthew 13, he says, he does this parable of the sower, and you're probably familiar with it. So here's the parable. A farmer scatters some seed. Okay, you remember this guy? He scatters some seed. It's the way they did it, just scattering seed. Don't have time to do this one at a time thing, so they're scattering seed. Well, in the process of scattering the seed, it falls on different types of soil. And it's interesting that Jesus describes 4 types of soil, because really, if you read between the lines, there's only 2. There's 2 types of soil, right? There's the one that produces fruit, and then there's everybody else, okay? And the point of the parable is to make that point. There's producing fruit, and remember we talked about producing fruit? There's producing fruit, that's this side of the page, and then there's everybody else. And a lot of people who are living over here, he describes two of the kinds of soil, living over here calling themselves Christians, but they're not producing fruit. And here's the reason why. So he scatters the seed, and some of it lands on the hard path. And you remember what happens to the seed on the hard path? I mean, you did turn to the passage, but you remember what happens to it? Okay, the birds eat it. That's right, the birds eat it. Okay, and now when he goes and he describes what the parable means, and he says, this is about scattering the word of God, scattering the word, the gospel, onto people. We are the soil. Okay, so the hard path represents people who the word doesn't even penetrate, because what happens to it? Who's the bird? Yeah, the evil one is how he describes him. The evil one. The evil one who won't even let it, who hates this gospel, who hates this Jesus. The evil one is there waiting. Okay, then he goes on to describe. He goes on, he says, the second kind of soil, you throw it out there, and this is the soil that's got stones in it, and it can't take root, or however he describes it, whatever. And it receives the word with joy at first response, and I'm starting to get the interpretation mixed up with the story. And then what happens? Do you remember what happens with the stones? No, did I get it backwards? That's the next one, of thorns. What happens to the stones, though? Why? Heat, but what does the heat represent? Trouble, okay? So, this is going to reflect back on what he said about losing your life, okay? Trouble, trial, pain, okay? And then he says there's another one, a third one. This one's got the thorns in it. And this one, the person also receives it with joy, but receives the word and everything. And again, I'm crossing the interpretation with the story. And he said, however, it also dies. What caused this death? Choked. What choked it? The cares of life, or what's another way he describes it? Worries of life, but what's the next line? Deceitfulness of wealth. So we have two things basically going on. And here's what I think he doesn't say in the story, but is true, is that the same evil one that's snatching is also the one responsible for stones and thorns. Okay, and I don't think that what he's describing here is a one-time deal. I used to wonder, so this good soil doesn't have stones or thorns? How do you get so lucky? How do he get so lucky that he doesn't have any trials? Or that he doesn't have any temptations? How did he get so lucky? Well, we've lived long enough to know that is not at all what Jesus is saying. So that changes the story a little bit once you start thinking about it. This good soil that's producing fruit is not producing fruit because it doesn't have the trials and doesn't have the temptations. It's because of how it handles the trials and the temptations. It's because of the effect of the trials on one soil and the effect of the temptations on another soil versus the effect of the trials and the temptations on the last soil. Does that make sense? Am I going too far in my interpretation? It makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, and again, so now we're back to the lose your life thing when he said, if you try and save your life, see, saving your life is about fear. I'm going to protect, I'm going to save, and I'm going to, I'm doing this all the time. I want to save my life. Fear, okay? Fear is where the trials are going to come in. Okay, let's bang on you a little bit. Save, protect me, right? Or the other guy, what good is it to gain the world? Gain is about desire. And so there's the temptations of life, the thorns. Satan only has two game plans. It's all very simple. He's either going to try and break you or he's going to try and buy you. He doesn't have anything else. He's very, very effective at both. So, you can try and protect yourself from him, and he will tear you to shreds. You can try and naively say, I'm not tempted, and he will work you over. And you might even be able to pull off either version of that story in church. And you will look every bit the Christian as everyone else sitting in church. But you'll be on this side of the page, and you will not be producing any fruit. You're dead in the water. You're just a church-going dead in the water. Okay? I want to make that abundantly clear. So, the good soil is still getting stones thrown in, and the good soil is still being enticed. It's not any different. He's got no advantage, but it's handling it differently. And basically what that comes back down to is focus. Grace gives us permission to do it again and again and again. And I think this is why Jesus said, take up your cross every single day. Because you take a day off, and the evil one has just been waiting for you to take a day off. Oh, you got something else to do? The kingdom not so important to you today? Awesome. I got something to sell you. I got some other purpose for you. Your children. How noble. How noble. Your children, they're beautiful. God gave them to you. Spend your life on your children. What does that mean? Oh, obviously, you want to make sure that they're happy and healthy. They get a university degree so they can continue to be happy and healthy, and then they can have happy and healthy children too, and on it goes, and you have a legacy. Congratulations, well done. Fail. Completely missed the boat. Everybody's doing that. Pagans are taking care of their kids. They never met Jesus. That's not what he said. That isn't going to work. Okay? And you're like, what? Don't take care of your children? I'm not saying that. But if you're going to really take care of your children, how about taking care of them under the umbrella of seeking the kingdom first? It's not their university degree. Unless they need a university degree to seek the kingdom first, then by all means, get them a university degree. But if it's not, you're killing your own kids, leading them, being a part of leading them astray. You're in the wrong hands. Focus. But again, grace will let you come back again. And this is what I learned. Every single day, I learned that I can completely fall apart because it seems like my weakness is trial. It Temptation is probably in there, and we can get all complicated about it, but it seems to me my weakness is trial. Satan just comes up and goes, boom! And I double over like a little sissy and fall on the floor and go, it hurts! It burns! I was betrayed! God! And Satan just laughs, and they all gather around and giggle. But then, all I have to do is start preaching to myself, and it works. I advise you to do this. Whether it's trial or temptation, whether you're struggling and suffering and hurting like crazy because somebody somewhere did something very awful to you, I'm not undermining that. It happened, it's real, it's legit. But it does not stand up against this. It does not stand up against this. These three keys have more power than that. You can come right back and you can say, no, here's who Jesus is. I remember now. Here's who Jesus is. And this is what he did. I believe it. So once again, let me resume the posture. I will lose my life again. Let me get back into position. I will remain in him again. And let me grab hold of my purpose. I will seek the kingdom first again. And it will hurt, and it will cost, and it will feel an awful lot like taking up a cross. And it's supposed to. Jesus is worth it. And besides, you get your life out of the deal.